Our next speaker is Rick Baum, is a faculty member at City College in San Francisco, which is also being destroyed and liquidated, public community college, and he's a member of AFT 2121 and HEAT. Welcome, Rick.
I'm supposed to be hosting this segment. It's an honor to follow the two people who just spoke. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank ILWU for letting us use their hall for this conference. I guess, well, there'll be others speaking. I want to talk about City College of San Francisco, and I want to say one of the reasons why I'm here is that we've been very inspired by SLAP. Those of us who are working at City College of San Francisco, at least the small group that I work with, because SLAP is a model for what we're looking for. One of the things that inspired us to participate in this conference is a need for people in the different school districts to learn what's going on in each of the different districts, because the problems that many of us are facing are the same problems. We're all under attack, especially in urban areas, by state agencies like FCMAT. And yet, when we've had a struggle at City College, it's confined to City College. So we just struggle at City College, when our struggle is very similar of what's going on elsewhere, and we should be working with other teachers elsewhere and supporting each other. And that's been, for me, a big failure. I want to go into specifically what's been happening to City College, and it's kind of a bummer. I just have to say so. It's not uplifting at all. But I find that there is a struggle in Oakland that is uplifting. So I see that there's hope in this world for something to be different. We do have a lot of divisions at City College, as Trent was just talking about. One of the big divisions in community colleges and in higher education is between those who are contingent or part-time teachers and those who are tenured permanent teachers. And it's a huge, we have two-tier contracts, which is very detrimental to the future of labor to allow for this. And this has been tolerated in higher education, probably going back to the 1960s, even before that, when oftentimes the contingent workers were wives of tenured professors at universities who themselves were equally educated, and they'd give them a job, a class or two to teach, and they would be paid a lot less than the tenured faculty, who are mainly males at that particular time. So I'd like to talk about City College, and it's almost 10 years ago to today that the accreditor of City College, this group called the ACCJC, sanctioned City College and said that City College had to prove why it should remain open. And their visiting team that came to the school prior to them making this sanction against the college had this to say about City College. They concluded that the instructional programs provide high-quality instruction and that students received comprehensive services. Doesn't that sound like a college that should be shut down? High quality instruction, comprehensive student services. What else is a school supposed to be doing? That to me is the ideal of what a school should be doing, and yet this accrediting body said, nope, we're going to force you to prove why you should remain open. And a year later, they threatened to close the school down. This is a school at the time that had over 100,000 students in it. It's kind of like, in some ways, it's like the crown jewel of community colleges in the state. It's like a mini university in terms of the diverse programs that it offers. That I've taught at about a dozen different community colleges, and none have anything like they have at City College. Well, as a result of this, the college has faced a severe downsizing that continues to this day, even though it received its accreditation in 2017. In 10 years, the student population went from 112,000 to less than 39,000. And that's as one example of that. In the first year of the pandemic, its student population went down by 40%. As opposed to statewide, there is a decline in the student population, but it's 10%. But at City College, it's 40% on top of already the loss of so many students. And this is despite San Francisco's population increasing by 75,000. I compare it to Peralta, which is a similar urban district, many ways the same type of population as City College. And in 2011, City College had almost twice as many students as Peralta, twice as many, By 2019, it had 14,000 more students than Peralta, and after the first year of the pandemic, it had 9,500 fewer students than Peralta. It's just unbelievable, the destruction that's taking place of the school. Other elements of this, just to highlight them, the faculty have gone from 1,800 to less than 1,000 during this time. The number of classes being offered has been declined by thousands. It was at close to 8,500 in 2011. As of just this last year, it's about 5,000. In addition, some of the campuses have been closed down. City College has satellite campuses. One of the more well-known ones is at Fort Mason. They shut that down. What's probably behind this, as far as many of us are concerned, is the real estate interest in San Francisco, because San Francisco, if you think there's not enough property in Oakland to develop, San Francisco is even more so. Everything is extremely valuable there. And so a lot of this seems to be orchestrated to serve the interest of the real estate industry, which I could give you specific examples if I have more time. Now, there's one thing that hasn't changed in terms of declines, and that's the number of administrators. So when the school had over 100,000 students in 2011, it had 40 administrators at the school. As of a couple years ago, that number had increased to 54, even though there's far less to administer at the college than previously. And not only that, to their benefit, and I would say, sure, people should get paid more living in a place like San Francisco because it's a premium, because of the costs there. They deserve some kind of premium. But the administrators at City College had, on average, they were being paid $40,000 more a year than administrators in other community colleges throughout the state. 40,000 more. It's just, in many ways, it's mind-boggling. Now, to justify the downsizing, an ongoing message that we receive is that there's a budget deficit or budget crisis. A little bit that I know about the Oakland K through 12 schools, it's the same message there. You've got a deficit, we need to close schools, we need to make cuts. Well, that's what they do at City College, although many of us would question if it's a real deficit. In fact, after the accreditors decided to threaten the school with being shut down, the state took it over. And the state rationale for taking it over, the only rationale they could use is a budget deficit. But they didn't use that. They concocted new rules saying if you're threatened with closure by the accreditors, then we can take you over. So in other words, if the deficit that they were claiming was real, they could have resorted to that, which they failed to do so. Now, with the decline of students, and the main source of revenue for the college is the student population, with that decline in students, there's a lot less revenue. So there may be something to the deficits that they're claiming. But in this last year, my union, AFT 2121, came up with a budget that showed that they did not have to make any more cuts, and that there would be more than enough money. And the people in charge just ignored it. They didn't even say what was wrong with that particular contention. They just went on with more cuts. And for the first time, they have basically fired tenured full-time faculty, which is something that's unheard of until recently with the pandemic. These are people who get tenure, and they expect to have a job for the rest of their lives. And now they're told, some of them actually got tenure during this last year, and the next thing they know, they're getting a layoff notice and they won't have work anymore. Now, that's the full-time teachers. I have to say, part-time teachers, in the last 3 years, more than 400 have lost their jobs. 400. So it's, the numbers for part-timers are treated as disposable. You bring them in when you need them, you get rid of them when you don't, and we have no protection under our union contract, even though we are dues-paying members of the union at the community college. So to justify the downsizing, they say we have a deficit. So the only thing to cut will be classes and teachers, and that leaves, as they damn well know, fewer students enrolling, because there's fewer classes to enroll in. Then they turn around and say, oh, we've got another deficit because we have so many fewer students. And then they make more cuts. It's called a downward spiral, and there's no end to it. essentially. I mean, we were arguing, and the union was the union was saying we could maintain the status quo. The group that I work with, City College Heat, were saying, no, we need to expand the college. We need to offer more because that's the only way you're ever going to attract more students back. But no, that's not their mindset. You make cuts to solve a deficit, and then you have a greater deficit and have to make more cuts. It reminds me of what I was always told about the Oakland schools when there was a state takeover. The Oakland schools had a $40 million deficit. And after the state took over, after the state took over, it rose to $100 million. So, that tells you how good it is for the state to take things over. Who's being impacted by this? Well, the ones who are most being impacted are the students. They are losing educational opportunities. Now, I want to say what is in particular about the students at City College of San Francisco is that overwhelmingly they come from the working class, lower middle class, and they're people of color. About 80% of the student population are students of color, as is true for Peralta. By making these cuts, you're basically cutting educational opportunities from people who have historically been deprived of educational opportunities. So you're reinforcing what I would call structural or institutional racism, which is that you're creating conditions in which a group of people, because of the color of their skin, mainly black and brown in the cases that I'm talking about, there are always exceptions, but where these folks have fewer and fewer educational opportunities, this will maintain our class structure and our institutional racism, which again deprives a group of people of educational opportunities systematically. Now, the people making the cuts, and I hate to say it, but many of them are themselves people of color, will be the first ones to say, we are against racism. Racism is a terrible thing, but they don't realize, or if they do, they won't cop to it, they don't realize that their decisions that they're making are reinforcing institutional racism by depriving people of educational opportunities. It's not just Peralta. It seems to me that schools facing all the cuts are the urban schools. So it's the Oakland public schools, it's Peralta, it's West Contra Costa, it's in Sacramento, and in San Francisco, the K through 12 there, and City College. So we really have to see it in this broader picture of what's going on at City College is highlighting what's happening elsewhere. Where does all the responsibility for this rest? And I think this has been really addressed already by Trent and Divya. I'll put it in probably a different way of looking at it. To me, it rests with the nature of capitalism. We're in a capitalist society. This is what happens in a capitalist society. Within capitalism are institutions like foundations like the Gates Foundation, the Lumina Foundation, and others who have plans for what they call student success. And who's against student success? Are we all in favor of student success? But if you read the fine print, you'll see that what student success comes down to is largely that to the extent that they have students, they're there for one purpose, to be trained to have skills that are desired by local businesses. In fact, Obama used to talk about wanting to form partnerships for community colleges between themselves and local businesses, and the local businesses would say, this is the kind of training we need, and the community colleges, in his vision, would provide it, or offer the classes to provide it. So use public funds to provide training for these private businesses. That was the whole idea about education. And ideally, they create a glut of trained workers to keep wages down. But that's what they often are talking about, student success. Now, it really varies if it's community colleges versus UC. The class of the students are quite different in these different institutions. So one is these foundations. The others are the policies of the national government, the state chancellor with the community colleges, the administration. I mean, the ideal of running something like a college right now, well, a lot of them have no background in education, is to be run like a business. And they have this business mentality. For example, we are always told as teachers, we need to increase our productivity. Well, doesn't that sound good? Who's against increasing productivity? It means, in theory, there's going to be less work that people have to do. They have more free time on their hands. What it means in the case of the community college is that we need to process more students through the system, faster and more at the same time. So bigger classes and we aren't there to educate them. I mean, there's a difference. We're there to train them in skills that are needed by businesses. And the more that we process through, the better. It's almost like we are an assembly line, and we're pumping information or intelligence into people's brains so that the businesses don't have to pay for this training. We're doing it for them. So they use terms like productivity and how we have to increase that. There's other ways, but big emphasis these days is that you get these students right out of high school. They're 18 years old. They immediately decide on a major. They attend full time, and they get in and out. And then you don't have to cost as much, and you don't have to worry about physical facilities and maintaining those. And then with the pandemic and online education, more and more this will be done online, and there will be a need for fewer and fewer teachers if you can offer the classes online. Another party that's responsible for this is the Board of Trustees at the school. I'm sure this is true with trustees elsewhere. At City College, it's even probably worse because most of them are there not because they are there because they're concerned about education. They're there because it's a stepping stone to higher office. If you recall, Jerry Brown was first on a board of a community college, although it helped that his daddy had been a governor for him to be well known. But boy, the people on my board, 3 of them have already run for board of supervisors. One of them just ran for the assembly and only got about 6% of the vote. And yet she has the gall to run again for a seat on the board of trustees. It shows you how important that is to her. I assume this is true elsewhere, that you go from the board to the city council to the assembly, hopefully to higher and better things. The board goes along with all of this. They are diverse. They're a diverse group. San Francisco, it used to be, I think, there's one time, I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying this, but half of them were gay. But it did stop them from carrying out these kinds of policies. They just rubber stamp what the administration is doing. Unfortunately, another responsible party are the union leaders at the college. They spend much of their time collaborating with the administration. They're coming up with a new scheme right now to put an initiative on the ballot to hit homeowners, even renters indirectly, with another property tax across the board, $150 per home, which is something that means if you live in a poor neighborhood of San Francisco, you pay $150. If you live in Pacific Heights and have a 10,000 square foot mansion, you pay $150. But there's an exception. If you're a Dianne Feinstein or Nancy Pelosi, you're worth millions of dollars. If you're 65 or older, you're exempt from paying this $150. So even though there's this tremendous state surplus, the city of San Francisco probably has a big surplus because they want to put $50 million more into the cops. The union is collaborating with the administration to ask the taxpayers to pay even more. Last thing I want to say, so the union leaders are spending too much time collaborating with management. They've done very little to resist the downsizing, and they refuse to empower members by giving them a meaningful voice in deciding on goals and strategies. It's called democracy. They're going to make the decisions for us, and then it's our job to carry them out. So thank you for being here. Thank you very much. And I guess, John, you want to speak next? John is from Peralta. Appreciate it.
Speaking to you as a part-time representative on our executive council from Merritt College, proud home of the Black Panther Party, where I was regularly teaching history until the blizzard of cuts resulting from the pandemic and from going online, which in normal situations is the absolute last thing that the poor and largely poor and non-white students at Peralta College, if anything, even more than at CCF, want to do. In my personal capacity, I should say, not as a member of the Executive Council I'm speaking, okay? We at Peralta are in a situation that has a lot of similarities to that at CCSF, though I suppose you'd have to say it's not as bad. The difference, actually, I should say something about why the difference, and Rick touched on this already. It's because because CCSF was indeed the flagship community college system in the state of California with 3 times as many students as any other system. I think even considerably more than UTLA. We'll be having a speaker from UTLA next. And so Jerry Brown and his protege Newsom, in fact, they didn't completely follow the Obama wanted to make it all connected to business. Jerry Brown and Newsom had a slightly different idea. Their idea was to take community colleges in California and convert them into essentially places where middle-class students whose grades weren't good enough to get them into UC Berkeley or Cal State Hayward or whatever, where they could get a little, essentially training, so that they could then transfer to the four-year colleges. And to hell with job training, to hell with adult education, to hell with everything else, and to hell with having a place like CCSF, which is like a mini university. So there's a deliberate policy from the top, which has absolutely nothing to do with money, of cutting CCSF down to the same level as other community colleges, which has gotten to the point where it even has less enrollment than Peralta, where it used to have 3 times as many. However, we at Peralta are in a parallel situation to CCSF, just not as extreme, since their goal for Peralta, their goal for CCSF had already been partially achieved at Peralta even years ago. As enrollment spirals down at Peralta, classes are on the chopping block, part-timers are losing their jobs, and students are absolutely stranded, okay? For COVID, by the way, they claim that inspections by outside contractors have shown that all the HVAC ventilation systems are absolutely just fine. To requests from teachers during the late winter and early spring for permission to temporarily move classes back to online at the absolute height of Omicron, the administration said, no, absolutely not. They decided to go back for the spring as face-to-face as possible at what may have been the wrong moment to do that. People voted, in enrollment, people voted against that with their, students voted against that with their feet. So we had a couple of large protest town halls on Zoom about that, the biggest of which was a joint meeting between us, our union, the operating engineers, the blue-collar workers, and the white-collar staff organized in the SEIU. They, by the way, were the ones that were hurt worst of all by the campus closures, a lot of them being laid off. And they were the angriest people at the town hall meeting. And I have to say that whatever is true at other colleges, if anything, the SEIU at Peralta is more militant than my local, which I'm on the executive board for. I will say that outright, okay? What do we need? We need teacher-student worker control, just like on one of the demands on that back sheet there, which I hope you all have. You need ventilation should be overseen by the workers who maintain it on a daily basis. They're the ones who know what's safe and what's not. Okay, the blue-collar workers in the operating engineers local. Okay, they're the ones who should be in charge of that. Mandatory vaccination and masking where necessary should be overseen by white-collar staff and student employees, not cops or security guards like at Peralta. That's the way to do that. And in the classrooms, it should be the teachers and the students, not the administration, who is deciding when and whether classes should be in person or online. That's the way it should be, okay? Now, these cutbacks are not because Peralta is in the red. They don't even claim that. At this point, in fact, we actually have a budget surplus at Peralta. And in fact, we had that before the money being thrown at, the money that is currently being thrown at the community colleges by the state, which is inadequate. They prefer most of it, they prefer to give most of it back to middle-class taxpayers instead of public services. Okay, so like Rick was saying, and just absolutely the same thing at Peralta, the mantra from Peralta, from the administration, is productivity. They want to use the pandemic and the hopefully temporary drop in enrollment as an excuse to downsize the college. The Peralta administration is still canceling classes with less than 25 students on census day. I think we may be the only system in the entire state which still maintains a minimum of 25 students in class on census day, thereby ensuring that Peralta will not recover and will continue to spiral downwards. And for this fall, on top of previous cuts, they're doing an across-the-board 10% cut in classes, not even distinguishing between those with full enrollments and those with poor enrollments, because they say that would be unfair. Just 10% across the board. Doesn't matter if the classes are filled to the brim, as they are in some circumstances. So our contract at Peralta expired last week, just like at CCSF, and like something like half the community colleges in California, by the way. I'm not sure it's true for the number of colleges, but in terms of student body, half of the student body in the community colleges in the state of California, the contracts expired last week, okay? Now, last time around, what's now, God, 3 years ago, how time flies, for our last contract negotiations, we had basically only one contract demand, namely to equalize the hourly wages of part-time and full-time instructors. And because we had a strong campaign and were quite seriously threatening strike action, we ended up winning that. On paper, at least, hourly wages for part-timers, hourly, are the same as for full-timers. However, on the other hand, for health coverage, we actually have worse health coverage than a lot of other community colleges. I mean, I came to Peralta from DVC, which is notorious as being not a great place for part-timers, and there we had 65% of our Kaiser paid for instead of the 50% you have at Peralta. Okay, so anyway, so that equality is good, but it's not as good as it sounds. Firstly, the wage level of full-time instructors at Peralta is almost dead last in the entire state. I think it's 72nd out of 73rd. And the difference between part-time and full-time hourly wages was one of the least in the whole state. In fact, during our contract campaign, that was one of the main arguments that our union officials raised at board meetings. They said, why not give it to us? It won't cost you hardly anything. So we got it, okay? However, but the contract campaign back in 2019 began simultaneously with the beginning of the big cutbacks, which got going even before the pandemic hit at Peralta. And so a lot of part-timers discovered that pay equity is all very well, but doesn't help if you don't have any classes. Actually, I'm one of them. My last history class was summer 2020. Haven't had one since. Now, I had just gotten elected to the executive committee when we began our contract campaign, and I fought to broaden our demands to do something about the class cuts. But to cut a long story short, got absolutely nowhere about that. Now, we've lost a lot of union members due to the class cuts, due to rapid turnover, especially with part-timers fleeing in droves, and new ones being hired to replace them, and also because it's very hard to do anything in terms of union organizing online. So this spring we had a membership drive, and I visited the campuses quite often. Everyone I talked to at BCC, at Merit, at Laney, absolutely everyone I talked to was outraged and itching to do something about our situation. But all three campuses were like ghost towns. There was hardly anyone there, you know? Now, one of the things about going online makes it very hard for union to do anything. We'll see what happens this fall, but if we don't take serious action, and by that I mean strike action, Peralta will continue to head right off the cliff. By the way, some people think that the solution is to elect pro-union people to the board of directors. Well, Peralta is the great success story on that. We got a board so pro-union that the chancellor quit, went to the California Board of Governors, and called for putting Peralta under receivership to the state. So what happened? Well, that pro-union board saved its necks by cutting a deal and promising to be even more anti-union than she was. So now, as my local president has put it in public, the past chancellor would yell and scream at the union negotiation meetings, but would sometimes be willing to make some concessions. So we did, in fact, end up with pay equality. Now, the so-called pro-union board is always very polite and friendly, but is still running scared about receivership and is unwilling to make any concessions to the union whatsoever, even the tiniest. Okay? That's the state of our contract negotiations. It's a bad joke. Now, the last thing I want to say is just a few words about privatization in Peralta. Why is it that the A's are going for Townsend? I'll tell you why. Because they tried to get land from Peralta, and they failed. Okay? They wanted to get the administration land from Peralta right across the street from Laney College, the flagship. However, Laney is also the blackest and poorest of the campuses. So I guess some people figured, who needs Laney? That's just for the poor people. Merit, where I teach, that's for black people and Latinos who at least have cars so they can drive over the hills. Laney is where you go if you don't have a car. because it's right next to a BART stop, okay? So basically, so what happens was, at first, our union leadership wasn't sure they wanted to talk. They figured, probably a lot of the members are A's fans. Who cares? But from pressure from below, they agreed to have a referendum. Should the PFT take a position against this? And to the complete surprise of my union president, the membership voted overwhelmingly that we don't want to have this. So, as a result, the PFT kind of stepped in. If anything, more or less took leadership in the campaign against our land being taken away and given to the Oakland A's. And we defeated that one. So that's when they decided to turn. To what's happening right now with the longshore workers. So that's what I got to say. And I think our next speaker, do we have Sonny Lloyd from UTLA, from LA.
Sonny Lloyd is a teacher at Ennis High School. He's a chapter president of the local there, or the school, high school. So welcome, Sonny Lloyd.
Yeah, I've been teaching here in LUSD for, I just finished up my 19th year. And I'm a UTLA member for now. Due to the vaccine mandates, you know, there's problems going on with that. The way the district is applying them, they're not allowing any accommodations to be on campus whatsoever. So, you know, I'm somebody who wants control over what goes into my body. And, you know, I've opted to not take the jab for now. And so I've been pushed off of Venice High School's campus. I did an online position last year. And now next year they're saying there is no more online, there's not enough online positions for all of us. And so I'm actually technically I'm on unpaid status right now until they figure that out. And so I'm kind of in the labor pool looking for jobs right now just as a backup. And I noticed one of the things that was problematic about the way the cuts were made for basically the unvaxxed teachers was I'm a 19-year teacher, and there's first-year teachers that were chosen to continue with the district over myself. And so we had a big violation of seniority there. That's in our contract. That's all over our contract. So again, just, you know, UTLA has to answer for that. Why 30-year teachers were let go for first-year teachers. So that's a fight we're fighting. With that, there is we are in the most chartered city in the country, Los Angeles. So as I'm looking for other positions out there, there's a lot of charter positions out there. And now the reality is really hitting me of what a charter model is all about. You're an at-will employee. You have no lifetime health care. You don't have the same retirement package that a public school teacher would get. And so I'm really seeing it for what it is now. It's just it's a scheme to devalue the profession, to devalue labor. And, you know, unfortunately, I'm in a position to have to look for work and possibly go that route just because there are so many charter schools in Los Angeles. And, you know, there's a lot of teachers on medical exemptions, too. They have a history of blood clots and things where taking this shot could end their life, could result in serious medical complications, but they're being pushed out of the district as well. So, you know, I do think that is a labor issue. And I know there's a lot of pro-mandate people out there. But, you know, after World War II, we decided, you know, we're not going to force medical interventions on people. We go with a voluntary model. And that's what I'm standing for. So and this medicine, this spike protein, it hasn't been out there for a long time. They have no long-term studies on this. And so people should be given a choice. And there's a lot of other school districts out there that are allowing people with accommodations to test once a week and prove they're not diseased, right? And so that's where I'm looking at, possibly going right now. But I will take it back to the charter issue and it's all interrelated, as I said. But there's two main schools that are being public schools that are being shut down here in LA, two black and brown schools. Orville Wright Middle School, which is in my area here near Westchester. And they have a situation that they were sharing a campus with Wish Charter Elementary, right? And Wish now is expanding to, that their fifth graders want to go to sixth grade in Wish. And Wish is like a school, it's a charter school that caters to students with disabilities, right? Apparently, their model was LAUSD is not doing enough for students with disabilities. So we're creating this whole program to, include, it's a very inclusive model for students with disabilities. So their fifth graders want to go to sixth grade now, right? But the campus, they're part of the campus on Orville Wright. It's not big enough to hold elementary and expand into middle. And so the decision was made to move the Orville Wright kids off of their campus so Wish can expand. And you would be moving the Orville Wright kids over to Westchester High School to take a section of a high school. And so there's a big uproar. There's a backlash against it, but it speaks to the issue of charters in the capitalist system. Corporations need to expand, right? So once they're there, once you allow them to set up, then their model is to expand. And with the finite resources of a school district, something has to give. And as the other speaker said, it's often the black and brown students, they're first in line to be removed. And that's something that, we need to consider. In LA, again, it's the epicenter. We have more charter schools than any city in the nation. Our school district actually has a charter school division at LAUSD. You can look it up. You can Google LAUSD charter school division. It takes you right there. And what's unique about it is it's one of the few school districts, the only one that I know of, that has a charter school division that openly assists charter corporations on how to set up within LAUSD, right? Or even without, it's a place for charter schools to come in LA and get assistance from the public school system on how to set up their operations, right? Which is it's very egregious, right? Here you have this capitalist privatization model in they actually have an office downtown in our public school district to help them with their operations. So, and what we hear a lot of in LAUSD is, if we don't approve the charters, if we don't help them out, they're gonna sue us for 14th Amendment, lack of equality. We're not giving them equal access. Well, what my message to the school board is, well, why not suing them? They're the ones disorganizing the public school system and pushing kids off their campus and being agents of gentrification. So Orville Wright Middle School, you can follow that fight. It's Orville Wright versus Middle School versus Wish Elementary School. There's a lot of articles out there. There's a petition online that the community started. And what's interesting, it was the community. It wasn't that the union did not really get involved. And that's another piece to this, is our union, they do a lot of posturing against privatization, but when it comes down to these fights, it's often parents, students, staff. They're kind of operating on their own. They're getting these petitions together. They're holding these meetings on their own. And the union isn't really leading the charge in these fights. And in fact, in our latest school board election, our union endorsed Kelly Gomez, who is notorious for taking charter money in her campaign. And so it's like, and I think the excuse is, yes, I'm in California. I'm in Los Angeles. The excuse is, well, Kelly Gomez is the front runner. I guess she's the lesser of whatever evil, and so we're going to back her. But that's where it's kind of come to now, where our union is actually backing pro-charter candidates for office, and it also not opposing pro-charter people. So Nick Melvoin, he raised over $1 million charter money, dark money, coming from all over the place. The union had 4 years to put together a candidate to oppose him. Just somebody like myself. Really, maybe I wasn't going to get the money, but we could have put a campaign, a grassroots campaign to oppose Nick Melvoin. They sat on their hands for 4 years, did not put up anybody against Nick Melvoin, so he basically ran unopposed, right? And so I believe our union's just not using their capital to push back against privatization as much as they can. The other school, the other black and brown middle school that's slated for closure is Pico Middle School. Pico was the, if you know Los Angeles history, he was the first mayor of Los Angeles, a mixed black and Latino individual back in like 1850. So that middle school is slated for closure. It was another, it's Gala charter school. And it's kind of the reverse situation. They're operating on a Los Angeles high school. It's LA High. They're operating on their campus. It's a girls' academy. They have the need to expand. They can't really expand on the high school campus for whatever reason. And so the district's, solution is to shut down Pico and, give their campus to Gala Academy, right? So those are the two biggest examples of what's going on here in LA in terms of privatization, being agents of gentrification, shutting down black and brown schools. In my neighborhood here, there's a local fight going with Marina Middle School in Goethe Elementary, German Immersion Elementary School. And a few years ago, I went to one of the board meetings of Goethe. They operate on a LAUSD campus, and I listened in to their board meeting, and it really came up, their need to expand, right? And I saw the numbers. This is the 5th grade class, and they want a 6th grade class, and so now they're going to need to take more space from Marina. And one of the parents there who was on the board actually of the elementary school, I talked to her and I said, well, what's the big deal here? Why do you need this German immersion school? Why isn't the local LAUSD not good enough? And she basically said, well, actually she's from Englewood, and she was a white lady from Englewood. And she basically said, I can't have my kids go to school in Englewood. I can't have my kids go to all black schools. So we need this German Immersion Academy, which it's a very, if you look at it and you see, it's like blonde hair, blue-eyed kids learning German on a LAUSD campus, and they're segregated literally from the black and brown kids. And it's frightening, really. It's just like right in your face segregation. And these parents are being vocal. They're saying we can't have our kids go to black and brown campuses. So their trick was there's no German immersion in LAUSD. So we'll have a German immersion program. We'll have a place, a unique place. And that's what that's the crux, right? That's how the charters get in. They offer something that the community is not offering. That's part of the charter application. What are you bringing that the school district is not? And that's a big part of how they're approved. In fact, that's one of the only ways they're approved, if they're bringing something novel. And, I think the school district can be ahead of these things and find out, okay, what do the communities want, aside from segregation, right? If that's what they want, then, school district can't really be a part of that. But they can be a part of saying, no, we're not going to allow segregation in LAUSD. And so we're not going to allow these schemes to segregate students, right? That's supposed to be illegal in the United States. And but aside from that, whatever, it's WISH is dealing with students with disabilities. The public system, we deal with that, right? We could say we offer accommodations. I teach kids with special ed all the time, and we can get ahead of that and offer these things. A girls' academy, that's not out of the picture for LAUSD to offer. So and lastly, I'll close on just as from a worker standpoint, it's a scheme to devalue our labor, to put us in a situation where we're at-will employees, where year to year, if we disagree with management, we're cut, we're let go. We don't have a stable retirement. We don't have seniority, so we don't have a stable career. And if you come down here at LA, you drive around, there's billboards all around saying, public schools, it's charter schools. They're really putting this big campaign about they are actually public schools, and they're really trying to, get the public on board. And so that's kind of my report from LA. And I appreciate you all. And I really agree with the speaker that we need workers on this. We need labor representation on city council. We also need national representation for racial minorities on our councils. And I recently ran for city council on that platform. And, I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. We also have Jess Nguyen, who is here, and she's a student at San Francisco City College. And we're going to open it up for discussion and comments.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the space to speak. My name is Jess Nguyen. I am a City College of San Francisco student. I am a student activist and advocate, and I think most students who are involved in the movement now to stop the class cuts, privatization, the detrimental impacts to student education, we're getting trained to be more engaged civically. And I'm so glad to be able to be in this space to share a little bit of my story. Public education is supposed to be educating students, giving us an opportunity to get our certificates or vocational training or being able to transfer. I came to City College seeking an engineering technology certificate to change careers. And during that, all the detrimental cuts, even though the City College Board trustees say that they support women in STEM and support vocational training, my program was cut and never restarted. And now we're getting to the point where even more departments are getting cut, that my change in degree is now getting dismantled. Sorry, it's been really frustrating because as a student, you should not be focused on politics, on bad money, on people with nefarious plans to close down the school and take the land. It's frustrating to work within the system and with associated students and advocate with the chancellor or with the board of trustees, and people aren't doing the best or the most what they could be doing to help students. We have students that stay in the system so long, and we've had administrators say, oh, it's the culture of the school. I'm like, no, it's in the culture. The culture of the school is that there's barriers. There's barriers everywhere in and community colleges, and it's really harmful to students because we are the labor of our city. In San Francisco, we have more billionaires concentrated, and yet we cannot graduate students with welding degrees or CNC training or culinary arts because so much has been cut. I think the most important thing from today for students and for everyone is, what can we do next? What can we do to build coalitions, to build spaces where students and workers get supported, that future, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it's better if I feel like so tired as a student, because not only physically am I showing up to protest, I'm educating other students that it happened. I had to take on digital advocacy and also run accounts for my department in order to recruit more students for the department, and also to collect data to bring to the chancellor and tell them, hey, these are the students that are impacted by the program cuts that you're doing. It's not just me. I don't want to be thanked for my story. I don't want to be thanked for my testimonial. I want people who are in positions of power, who are supposed to educate the students what they're supposed to be doing, is to actually help students finish those certificates and degrees. We are having barriers put in front of us because of other nefarious, desires and personal people's agenda. So I hope people come together and support better candidates for City College Board and better candidates for Board of Education, and better candidates that are pro-labor, pro-public education, all the things that we need as a community in order to survive.
Thank you.
Can I say one other
Sure.
thing? If anyone is interested in getting involved, you can follow on Twitter or on Instagram, CCSF Student Says. And then you can direct message us, and for any of the events that other groups might be putting on locally in the Bay Area, or if you need up boosting, feel free to tag us and we'll uplift and amplify as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're going to move to discussion now.
My name is Millie Cleveland. I am a retired union rep from SEIU 1021. And what I think we need to be talking about is the fact that instead of just hearing all the individual examples of how privatization is screwing up everything, what are we going to do about it? And what I think is missing from the conversation is the fact that we don't have a one voice to fight all of these privatization efforts, be it schools, be it public services, whatever. We don't have one voice. The Democratic Party is not our voice right now, but we have to make it be our voice. And I think the role that SLAP has is that we need to organize and help our unions become more progressive, that we have a fight inside our unions for democracy, and that this fight, the reason why our unions are silent on these key issues is because of their connection to the corporations and the Democratic Party. So we have to fight to organize the rank and file to have power within our unions. And I think that is something that SLAP needs to take up. I want to give an example within, unfortunately, SEIU 1021. SEIU 1021 has committees, Committee on Political Education, the committees that seek endorsements for ballot initiatives and politicians and such. And the Alameda, and it's broken down based on regions. The Alameda County COPE Committee in 2019 had a presentation from port workers. The SEIU port workers are the ones that support the infrastructure of the port for ILWU. The carpenters, the plumbers, the electricians, the gardeners, and they also have the airport. They made a presentation to the Alameda Cope Committee about how horrible it would be to have a stadium at Howard Terminal and how it would jeopardize the operations of the port. The Cope Committee supported those workers and voted to oppose the Howard Terminal. 2 years later, when
30 seconds.
I can't finish within 30 seconds.
You have to. We all have to. 1 minute. You can have 1 minute.
The bottom line is when SLAP got organized, we asked the port representatives, the port chapter president, to represent his members and say that they oppose the terminal. And the hierarchy of the staff told him no, not to speak at the press conference. The workers came back to the Cope Committee a couple of weeks ago and criticized the Cope Committee for being silent on the issue. The Cope and the staff tried to talk them out of opposing the Howard Terminal. The rank and file members of Cope, not only did they oppose the staff, they voted unanimously to join SLAP. So what has to happen is our focus needs to be more on how are we organizing and supporting the rank and file to take on the opportunist relationship our hierarchies in the union have with the Democratic Party.
There you go.
Okay? That is our job. And what SLAP needs to do is be a formal representative of rank and file movements within the Bay Area. And that's my suggestion.
Okay.
I'm Jack Gerson. I'm a retired Oakland teacher. I think that what Millie said is true, but I think that if we're going to organize the rank and file, it has to be, and if we're going to resist the attacks, it has to be on more than just a defensive basis of being on the back foot, and we've been on the back foot for a long time. We're not going to be able to really mobilize a successful united fight and win without a vision of what it is we're fighting for and how to fight forward. For example, in fighting against charter schools are a cutting edge of the assault on public education by the privatizers. But the status quo before charter schools was unacceptable. The first charter school in the Bay Area was in San Carlos in 1994. Public education was unequal, and it was completely a shambles for those in the highest poverty areas, especially the black and brown communities. If we successfully get rid of charter schools and we don't fight for what's needed, we're going to find that there's just going to be another plan. Vouchers are coming back. Arizona is just putting in universal vouchers, for example, where they guarantee tuition for private schools, so for private education. That's what was in place before the charter schools, and it could come back, and there are many other things, high-stakes testing. So we have to have a vision of what we're fighting for. In 2007 to 2010, 2011, the OEA put forward in contract, the three main points were class size of no more than 15 in the lowest achieving schools, which are almost all the schools in the Flatlands area, and a maximum class size of 20 across the board, with 15 in the lowest achieving schools, which were the majority of students in Oakland and almost all the schools in the Flatlands. A 20% across the board raise for teachers, and a return to fully employer-paid health benefits. We were told by the state leadership,
30 seconds.
okay, that this was completely unrealistic and we'd be laughingstocks. Instead, it was met with overwhelming support and was, in fact, hailed in neighboring school districts. But we could not get CTA and the CTA representatives in Oakland, in the Oakland leadership, to fight for that. Instead, they said, you don't have enough support. We only have 60% or 70% or so of the membership who go out on strike. That's because they opposed it. That's because they were the ones who split. And until we understand that we have to put forward a vision and fight for it and expose what the leadership is doing, we'll never get anywhere. That CTA leadership is completely in lockstep with and integrated with the Democratic Party leadership in the state. And they act as basically a temporary agency for the Democrats and funders for the Democrats, as is the case for the union bureaucracy across the board, across the state and across the country. And I could give example after example of that. And I want to say one other thing, which is I know that people are saying that there's enough money now, and there is certainly enough money so the schools don't have to be closed. But what's really needed in order to get the vision of schools that students need, which is what we need to really have the united fight, is to turn the priorities upside down. That's going to require qualitatively more money. We still have to go after the billionaires. We have to go after capital. We have to go after the whole tax structure, and we have to turn things around and reorganize the way the society runs from top to bottom. Thank you.
Excited about the possibilities. The SLAP is very important. Millie's comments were great. We have to do both inside our unions, and we need a labor party. The Democrats are at war with working people in the state. The California Community Schools Partnership Program is privatization on steroids. And Newsom just put out $3 billion for planning, for applications, for taking the idea of community schools, which we all support the concept in reality, but they're hijacking this to shut down basically the public schools, like in New Orleans, where these exclusionary charters, if you get kicked out, there's no local schools, there's nothing there for you. And that's what they want to go to. And the CCSPP, California Community Schools Partnership Program, is, they've got $3 billion just for planning. And guess the first people in line were Rocket Ship and KIP, who, we're dealing with on the harbor and with the attack on the schools in Oakland. So, we need a labor party. We need, in the short term, to build a labor party, we need to run candidates that will support our community, our real community public schools in Oakland right now. I mean, the school system was run by the capitalists and it failed. It did fail us, but the promise of the birthright of education, was the idea from the Reconstruction period, and Prescott School was founded in that period, and they backed down on shutting down Prescott because it looked bad shutting down the first school, that Horace Mann and the Reconstruction called for, and the idea that people have a right to public education. But also, FICMAT is a monstrosity. We have to embarrass the Democrats. It's based in Kern County, Kevin McCarthy's district. The state contracts with the Kern County School District, which is like 48th of the counties in their schools. They're terrible. And their economics program is who's dictating economic policy to San Francisco, Oakland, West Contra Costa. We have to expose this and denounce it. It's run by a program that are educated in Chicago school, Friedman, insanity.
Time.
That's what's right. The school finances in California, and we have to take it down.
So, very quickly, my name is Bill Boulderston, longtime teacher in Oakland, longtime activist here, and I will add a delegate to the Alameda Central Labor Council. Just a few scattered thoughts here. I know we're running behind schedule. One is on this question of the state surplus. Jack's absolutely right. That's not adequate. It's not the effect in terms of who really should pay, as we say in the program we put forward. But what we do have to realize is we do have to win short-term victories, even while we're looking in the long term. And the question is not the surplus. Prop 99 guarantees, Prop 98, pardon me, guarantees so much going to the schools. It's how we fight for how that money is going to be used here on the ground. Is it going to be used for class size reduction? Is it going to be used for programs and staff? Or is it going to be more bureaucracy like we heard about the City College? So we have immediate fights. We have fights with the school board. It doesn't mean our longer view of class independence, of building from the base level is incorrect, but it can't be just abstract. And I'll end by just talking about two positive things. One is I came back from the Labor Notes Conference. You see the shirt. And there were 4,000 people there. The vast percentage were rank and file members, not big bureaucrats. Yes, there were some there. I'm going to deny that. And the vast percentage were young people. And so I think that it goes to show that the energy is there, the desire is there. And in fact, most of them want to break with the Democratic Party. So it gives us, I think, some vision of the future. And the other positive thing, of course, we have to look at is the kind of struggle that's going on at Parker School and how that has energized people. And I think it's exemplary not only for us in Oakland, but throughout the state and country. Thanks.
I want to talk about labor and what's happening in the labor movement. I totally agree with what Millie was saying. I'm SEIU 1021. I'm a chapter president out at San Francisco General Hospital. I'm also one of the co-chairs in San Francisco and a member of the San Francisco Labor Council. And I will tell you that the San Francisco Labor Council, which should be working towards all labor, is definitely in the pocket of the powers that be. It's clear when it comes to all the building they want to do for housing that the workers that they represent can't afford to live in, they support it. And it's all about the money. And that's what I see. That's happening with labor. I see a lot of the decisions that are made in our union, even sitting within our COPE group, about the divisions that there are. And one of the issues, my primary issue is working on the issues of black workers in the workplace. And what I will tell you is that labor is complicit. We don't see them helping us, walking side by side, fighting with us. For us to get our union to do anything, Cheryl Thornton and myself, they were supporting somebody for mayor, and we just stood outside of our office and said, okay, we want our money back, because we had given that woman $50,000 when she was running, because we endorsed her. And so that started it, and they did a little then, right? We got a little bit of cooperation then. But what I see now is they're backing off again, and we're just being relentless and will not stop. And we're not gonna stop. And they're gonna deal with it. And the Labor Council is gonna hear from it. And I don't have any issue with attacking the Labor Council or anybody else who are supporting system.
I'm a resident of District 10 in San Francisco. I'm a member of SEIU 10-1, and I am a COPE delegate for the and a member of the San Francisco Labor Council. So the privatization in healthcare and the nonprofits. 3 years ago, I ran for office in SEIU 10-1, and it was a regional office, and we had to come to Oakland to I'm sorry, I lost my turn. Yeah, to campaign, I'm sorry, to campaign for ourselves. And we went to Highland Hospital because we're healthcare workers, and we went to the healthcare system, and I was really shocked what I was seeing, that Highland Hospital was being privatized. And we talked to worker after worker after worker. And we went to our union leadership to ring the alarm, and they didn't do anything. And they continued to let Highland Hospital be privatized, to be divided up, and so, it was shocking. And so I was like, why is this happening? So fast forward to these next 3 years, we find out that in San Francisco, SEIU is organizing our own union, is organizing the people who are actually taking our jobs. They were organizing within our union. They organized the nonprofit Health Right 360, and they took a lot of the city jobs that are paid over into the nonprofit, privatizing, public health. And so we've been trying to educate the members about what is going on, and people are starting to wake up, but Health Right 360 now has its own network. It has a line of business into San Francisco General, but yet they're separate. They're separate, they're not city employees, they're nonprofit employees. And now these nonprofit employees, along with the union, are trying to organize them to get the same wages that we have, but not to be city workers in our charter. And it makes no sense to me. Why can't these be city workers if services have to expand? Because the services are needed. So I guess what I want to talk about in the privatization is how our union voices are so silent and how they keep the membership asleep, and how the unions have actually, the leadership, they've left the communities. The communities, the people in the community are saying one thing, and a lot of those are union people in the communities. But they're not hearing our voice, and they're not even interested in what we need. They seem to be only interested in what the billionaires want. They're right along with it. And as far as systemic racism going on, yeah, there's a lot of it, but they're using a lot of black people, black faces, to carry the message and to do it. Case in point, we just recalled San Francisco, a progressive district attorney. Okay, we recalled him. I worked on that campaign, No Against No on H. And we recalled him, Chesa Boudin, we recalled him because they said, we have to lower crime, and he's responsible for the crime in the city. No. Not the policies of underpaying people, not the policies that are allowing black and brown kids to be miseducated by the public school system to add to the pipeline to prison, not to, these are the things, not to, fight for affordable housing that we all can live in, not just under the disguise of affordable housing where the AMIs, the area medium income, is too high for most workers to take advantage of. So the systemic racism, and I also want to bring up about this whole thing about Asian hate. This whole narrative that they're running, I was heavily involved with redistricting and in San Francisco. And some of that is true, but it's really a backlash on black people to do the initiatives that they want to do, to destroy communities of color. That's what this is about. It's not about making, and recalling Chesa Boudin was not about making San Francisco safer. So the new DA that they appointed, that was appointed yesterday by Mayor London Breed, she identifies as black and white. They put a black face there, and she's already said who she's going to be arresting. And I just don't understand how San Francisco is so asleep. We, black people, are 5% of the population there, yet we are over 50% of the jail population in San Francisco. How can that be? How can that be? So we are on the streets. We are the most unhoused population. This is who she's going to arrest. And the people that recalled her are the people that said, stop the Asian hate. And they have a lot of money. And they're using her to clean us out of San Francisco. Because the billionaires need that land now, and they've got to get us out of San Francisco so that they can develop it. They don't care. And our union, I'm part of the largest union in California, and they're silent. And our president, Joseph Bryant, is going to be going on to the international. They made an announcement about it. And we're not even sure if there's going to be an election to replace him. They keep doing this to us. We don't have a voice. They're not raising leaders. I saw this in redistricting. I've seen it in the union. We are not raising leaders in our community. So I'm glad that this SLAP is here, because we have got to bring people in and let people know that this is not just about racism. This is about an attack on the middle class. This is about an attack on the working class to get rid of us. And we all have to stand together, and I'm in agreement. We need a general strike. 3 years ago, I was terrified of when they said, Steve started talking about a general strike. I kept thinking about how there was going to be all this famine, like in the 30s when this happened. But there's going to be this famine anyway, because a few people control the food supply, a few people control the water supply, and a few people are going to control the housing, and a few people are going to control they're controlling the education system, and that's why we see all of this happening in the education. We see it happening in the health care. We see it happening in the housing. It's all being privatized. And and it's true, our Democratic Party is failing us. All of us were thinking, through our party we were going to get something, but they have disenfranchised us. They don't care about us either. So I think that, again, I think that we need to figure out a long-term strategy so that when we get together again, that this room is overflowing with people who are ready to go outside and start knocking on doors and stopping this madness. Stop the development at Howard Terminal in Oakland. Stop the privatization of the healthcare system. Stop the systemic racism and the miseducation of our children and adding all of these charter schools, and start demanding that we build housing that is affordable for all.